The sun had barely begun to rise, casting a pale orange glow over the sleepy suburban street. Birds chirped softly. Neighbors began their morning routines, and the scent of fresh bread from Mrs. Whitmore's kitchen drifted across the quiet lawns. Everyone loved Mrs. Whitmore. She was the kind of grandmother everyone wished they had. Gentle, attentive, baking cookies for the local children, volunteering at the library, knitting scarves for the winter. She smiled easily, and no one could imagine the darkness lurking behind those warm hazel eyes. But the darkness was there, and it had been for decades. At precisely 7:32 a.m., the first scream pierced the neighborhood. It came from the house across the street, Mr. Caldwell's. By the time neighbors arrived, it was too late. There was no sign of forced entry, no struggle, just silence, and a note pinned to the door with a perfectly sharpened silver knife. For the wrongs of the past, justice cannot wait. No one suspected Mrs. Whitmore. Who could? The mild-mannered woman baking apple pies just 2 days ago? Yet, as the police combed through the scene, piecing together what they could, an unsettling pattern began to emerge. Every crime seemed carefully orchestrated, leaving behind not just death, but a message. And every message seemed personal. Inside her cozy living room, Mrs. Whitmore sipped her tea and hummed an old lullaby. She looked out the window, watching the uniformed officers scurry about like ants, completely unaware that she had been the first to arrive at the scene, calmly assessing the outcome before calling them. Her hands were steady, her expression serene. It was almost cruel how ordinary she looked while the world outside was unraveling. Flashbacks stirred in her mind, pulling her back decades. She was 16, and her world had fallen apart in the span of a single week. Her parents, the people she had trusted most, were taken from her in a car accident caused by someone drunk and careless. She had begged for justice. The courts had done nothing. The driver, someone with connections and money, walked free, smirking at the tragedy they had caused. That day, something inside her shifted. It was not just grief. It was rage. A cold, precise rage that had lain dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And over the years, it had grown, cultivated carefully, like the garden she tended every morning. Her first lesson had come years later, when she was 23. A neighbor, a man who had tormented children in her small town, had moved in next door. No one suspected him, but she did. One evening, as he bragged to his friends about another exploit, she slipped into the shadows, learned his routines, and executed a plan that left the world believing it was a tragic accident. It was intoxicating, the feeling of control, of retribution. She never stopped to question it. The universe had denied her justice, so she would deliver it herself. Back in the present, the next neighbor to vanish was Mrs. Eddington, an elderly woman who had once lied to protect her abusive husband from the law. Again, no one suspected foul play, a simple accident on a slick staircase. But behind the closed doors of Mrs. Whitmore's home, she kept meticulous notes. Each life, each wrong, cataloged with the precision of a surgeon. Her grandson, Thomas, lived with her during the week while his parents traveled for work. He adored her. He thought she was magic, her stories, her warmth, the way she seemed to make everything safe. He did not know that his safety was the only thing she could never harm. Not because she could not, but because he was the only piece of light she allowed herself to hold on to. Everyone else was a target. One evening, after Thomas had gone to bed, she sat by the fireplace, reviewing her list. Names, dates, and little reminders scribbled in careful, looping handwriting. "Justice delayed is justice denied," she murmured. Each entry brought a memory, faces contorted in anger, cruelty, or indifference. Each memory fueled her resolve. But there was a complication. The police were growing suspicious. Their latest lead was close, far closer than she had anticipated. Officer Daniels, a young detective with a keen eye for patterns, had begun noticing similarities, small details that others dismissed. The placement of notes, the timing of the accidents, the subtle precision that hinted at someone meticulous and intelligent. The challenge excited her. She had never been pushed this close before, but she thrived under pressure. She planned carefully, setting traps within traps, ensuring that anyone who suspected her would never find proof. As days passed, the neighborhood grew tense. People whispered about strange occurrences, windows left open, lights flickering at odd hours, fleeting glimpses of her figure in the yard at night. Yet, most dismissed it. After all, she was Mrs. Whitmore, the sweet grandmother. No one could imagine the truth. Meanwhile, Thomas began noticing things. The way she sometimes paused mid-sentence, staring into space as if listening to a voice only she could hear. The way she would hum lullabies while sharpening knives for her kitchen, just a little too methodically. He asked questions, small and innocent at first. "Grandma, why do you keep writing in that notebook?" She smiled, brushing off the question. "Just a recipe list, darling." But Thomas was curious. Children are always curious. And children notice patterns adults overlook. One night, he followed her quietly. She moved silently through the kitchen, lit only by the dim glow of the stove, her hands steady as she prepared something. Not a meal. Something else. He held his breath as she lifted a silver knife with such precision it was almost artistic. And then she froze, as if sensing him. "Thomas," she said softly, her voice like velvet over steel. "Go back to bed. Some things are not meant to be seen until you are ready." That night, sleep eluded Thomas. He thought of the stories she had told him, tales of heroes, villains, and justice. But the shadows of the night felt heavier, the house quieter, and he could not shake the feeling that the woman who loved him most could also be capable of things unimaginable. The following morning, Officer Daniels arrived at her door, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said politely, "may I ask a few questions about the neighbors' accidents?" Her smile was warm, disarming. "Of course, Detective. Anything to help." He studied her, noting her calm demeanor, the way her hands rested gently on the countertop. But there was something in her eyes, a glint, a depth that made him pause, something he could not quite place. "Have you ever felt wronged, Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked carefully, almost as a test. Her smile did not falter. "Who has not, Detective? Life is not always fair." And that was all he got. But the question lingered, planting a seed of doubt in both their minds. She was clever, too clever. And the more Daniels investigated, the more he realized that the answers would not come easily. Days passed, and the neighborhood's fear grew. Rumors swirled, suspicions arose, but no proof ever stuck. Every lead hit a wall, every clue turned cold. Mrs. Whitmore continued her routines, baking, knitting, smiling, while the ghosts of her past whispered in her mind, reminding her of the debt the world owed her. By now, her pattern was clear. Each act of vengeance was symbolic. Each death was meticulously chosen to mirror the injustice she had suffered or witnessed. It was more than revenge. It was a message, a reflection of the failures of society, a dark morality tale that no one could stop. One evening, as she sat by the fire, reviewing her latest plans, she allowed herself a rare smile. The game was intensifying, and she loved it. The thrill, the challenge, the delicate balance between concealment and revelation. It was intoxicating. Yet even as she planned, she knew the final act had to be extraordinary. The culmination of her decades-long crusade would leave a mark that no one would forget. And for that, she would need someone clever, someone observant, someone like Thomas. Because the final lesson, the ultimate revelation, was not just for the world outside. It was for him. The rain tapped lightly against the windows of Mrs. Whitmore's modest home, a soft percussion that somehow mirrored the rhythm of her thoughts. The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest she carried within her, a storm she had nurtured for decades. Thomas had noticed her restlessness. Some nights she would pace, murmuring to herself in a voice so soft that even he, lying in the next room, could barely catch the words. Other nights she would sit silently by the fire, staring into the flames, as if trying to remember someone she had long lost. It was in these moments that the past came alive. She remembered the day everything changed. 16 years old, her world obliterated in a single week. Her parents had been careless victims of a drunk driver with influence, someone the courts deemed untouchable. Justice had been delayed and then denied. The grief had been unbearable, but grief alone was not enough to transform her. It was the injustice, the arrogance of the world that had planted a seed of something far darker. Years later, that seed had sprouted. Her first deliberate act of vengeance was both crude and precise. A man in her small town, someone who had tormented children, had gone unnoticed by the law. She had watched him for weeks, learning his routines, studying the minutiae of his life. And then, one rainy night, she struck. It was clean, efficient, and untraceable. Everyone assumed it was an accident, just another tragic misfortune. But to her, it was justice restored. Each act thereafter became more sophisticated. She studied human behavior, the patterns of law enforcement, and the habits of her victims. With each successful act, her confidence grew, and so did her audacity. She never sought recognition. She wanted only the satisfaction of rebalancing the scales. Yet, as she planned her latest series of corrections, a shadow loomed, a detective named Daniels. He was meticulous, patient, and persistent. Unlike others, he did not just glance at the surface. He looked for patterns, connections, inconsistencies, and he had begun to see them. One evening, Daniels came to her door again, carrying a folder thick with notes. He was polite, respectful even, but there was an intensity in his eyes that unsettled her. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began, placing the folder on her kitchen table, "these incidents, they're not coincidences. There's a pattern, and I need your help to understand it." She smiled, pouring him a cup of tea. "Detective, I've always believed that the world is too complex for coincidences to matter, but I'm happy to help, of course." Daniels studied her, noting the calmness in her posture, the softness of her voice, the warmth in her smile. Yet beneath it, he sensed a precision that did not belong to someone so gentle.
"You've lived here a long time, Mrs. Whitmore?" he continued cautiously.
Have you ever felt wronged by the system, by people who should have been held accountable? Her hands paused on her teacup. A flicker of something, regret, amusement, passed through her eyes. We all have, Detective. We all have. The conversation ended with nothing more than polite smiles, but it left an impression. Daniels felt both respect and unease, an odd duality that made him dig deeper. Meanwhile, Thomas's curiosity had grown to a subtle fear. He could not shake the feeling that the woman he adored harbored secrets that could be dangerous. He began noticing small things, patterns in the way she moved through the house, the way she sharpened her knives with almost ritualistic precision, the way her gaze lingered on the neighborhood as if counting every soul. One night, he followed her again, careful to stay in the shadows. She moved through the kitchen with deliberate calm, laying out items on the counter. But this time, he saw more. Maps, notes, and photographs of neighbors, each annotated with cryptic symbols and dates. He froze, heart hammering, as she turned suddenly, as if sensing his presence. "Thomas," she said softly, her voice both tender and unnervingly sharp. "Some lessons cannot be understood until the time is right." The boy backed away, retreating silently to his room. The images burned into his mind. Sleep evaded him that night. In her study, Mrs. Whitmore revisited her early lessons. Each act of vengeance had been meticulously planned, rooted in both strategy and emotion. She remembered the thrill of her first successful act, the adrenaline, the certainty that justice had been done. Each subsequent act refined her methods, honing them into an art. And now, with Daniels closing in, the stakes were higher than ever. She reviewed her current list. Each entry was more than a target. It was a story, a reflection of injustice. Every death had to be meaningful, symbolic, unforgettable. She took particular care with the next planned act. It had to be her masterpiece, a culmination of decades of planning. As she prepared, memories flooded in. The parents she had lost, the friends betrayed by the system, the countless injustices that had left their mark. And with each memory came clarity. This was not mere murder. It was a reckoning she had been perfecting her entire life. Daniels, unaware of her inner deliberations, began piecing together a profile. He noted the precision, the pattern of victim selection, and the absence of conventional evidence. Whoever was behind this was intelligent, deliberate, and calculating. Yet, in all his analysis, he never considered that the culprit could be the seemingly sweet grandmother everyone adored. The neighborhood grew uneasy. Whispers and glances replaced friendly greetings. Yet no one suspected Mrs. Whitmore. To them, she remained the embodiment of warmth and kindness. That was her power. No one ever looked closely at what they already trusted. Thomas, caught between fear and loyalty, began to confront his grandmother gently. "Grandma, why do you do these things?" he asked one afternoon, his voice trembling. She paused, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Sometimes, Thomas, the world does not care for the innocent. Sometimes, those who are wronged must stand up themselves." "Are the people dead?" he asked, almost whispering. "Yes, darling, but they were not innocent," she replied, her tone soft yet firm. The boy recoiled but did not leave. He was both terrified and fascinated, a duality she recognized. He was the perfect observer, someone who could witness without judgment, someone she could train to understand the complexity of her moral code. As weeks passed, Daniels began closing in. He connected dots, noticed patterns, and even confronted neighbors with subtle questions. Each encounter revealed small truths, but not enough to implicate her. Every time he thought he was close, Mrs. Whitmore subtly diverted his attention, offering assistance, advice, even sympathy for his struggles. She played the perfect host, the perfect grandmother, the perfect suspect-free observer. Yet the final act approached. Mrs. Whitmore knew it had to be grand, a lesson no one could ignore. And for this, she needed an ally and a witness, Thomas. She began to subtly guide him, teaching him about observation, planning, and moral justice, preparing him for the revelation that would soon shake the neighborhood to its core. Then came the night when everything changed. A storm raged outside, thunder rolling over the hills like a warning drum. Mrs. Whitmore moved with deliberate grace, setting her plan into motion. It was a plan decades in the making, a culmination of every injustice, every wrong, every lesson she had ever learned. Thomas watched, heart racing, as she carried out actions that mirrored tragedies from her past. He began to see the pattern, the artistry, the intelligence behind the acts. And yet, he also began to sense the danger, the unrelenting drive that had consumed her for decades. As the storm raged, Daniels closed in, piecing together the evidence, following the trail she had left behind, unaware that he was walking straight into her design. Each step he took, each clue he uncovered, led him deeper into her web. And in the shadows, Thomas understood. He understood the truth about his grandmother, the depth of her pain, and the lengths she would go to deliver her justice. He realized that the world outside had failed her, and now nothing could stop her from balancing the scales. The night ended not with arrest, not with capture, but with a revelation. A glimpse into the mind of a woman shaped by tragedy, honed by vengeance, and prepared to teach the world the cost of injustice. And somewhere in the darkness, Daniels felt a chill, a sudden understanding that the person he had been chasing was not a monster in the traditional sense. She was something else entirely, something terrifying in its intelligence, calculated cruelty, and unshakable sense of purpose. The storm had passed, leaving the streets slick and reflective, like a mirror for the dark events that had unfolded. Inside the Whitmore home, the air was thick with anticipation, the calm before the ultimate storm. Mrs. Whitmore moved through her house with the same precision she had honed over decades, every step measured, every gesture deliberate. This was the culmination of her lifetime of planning, the final act that would leave an indelible mark, not just on the neighborhood, but on those who thought they understood her. Thomas sat quietly in the study, notebook in hand. She had asked him to watch, to observe, to learn. He did not understand everything, but he understood enough to know that tonight would change everything. The images he had glimpsed in the shadows weeks ago had prepared him, but not for the truth. At precisely midnight, a knock came at the door. Daniels, armed with his notes, suspicion thick in his gaze, called out politely, unaware of the trap that had been laid for him. "Mrs. Whitmore, may I speak with you? I have questions about recent events." Her voice, calm and melodious, greeted him from the shadows. "Of course, Detective. Come in. You must be exhausted from all your diligent work." He stepped inside, unaware that every movement he made, every decision, had been anticipated. The house felt different tonight, warmer, almost cozy, but there was a tension in the air that made his skin crawl. He followed her to the kitchen, noting the arrangement of objects: a teapot steaming gently on the stove, knives neatly aligned on the counter, photographs pinned to the corkboard in a pattern that made his stomach tighten. "Detective," she said softly, pouring him a cup of tea, "I've been reflecting on the past, on the nature of justice, on how sometimes we must take matters into our own hands when the world refuses to act." Daniels swallowed hard, suddenly aware that this woman, the kindly grandmother everyone adored, might be more dangerous than he could have imagined. Yet her words were carefully measured, almost philosophical, and they did not betray the full weight of her actions. Thomas watched, holding his breath. He knew something was coming. He had sensed it, but he did not know exactly what. Mrs. Whitmore set her teacup down, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge. "Detective, would you like to see the culmination of my lifetime of learning?" Daniels hesitated, but curiosity won. "What do you mean?" She gestured toward the corkboard. Every photograph, every note, every symbol told a story. They were not just victims. They were pieces of a puzzle, a reflection of a world that had wronged her, a demonstration of how she had corrected the balance. "You've been observing, yes?" she asked. "But have you truly understood?" Daniel stepped closer, squinting at the intricate connections, tracing lines from one photo to another. The realization hit him slowly, horrifyingly. The pattern, the precision, the selection of victims, it was deliberate. She had orchestrated every incident, anticipating every investigation, and always staying 2 steps ahead. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to speak, to warn Daniels, but she raised a finger to her lips, signaling him to remain silent. "You see," she continued, "the world failed me once. My family, taken by the careless and the corrupt. The justice system, blind and impotent. I swore then that I would not wait for justice. I would create it myself, one step at a time." Daniels felt a chill. He had suspected intelligence, cunning, perhaps obsession, but not this level of calculated purpose. He realized, with dawning horror, that he was not merely dealing with a murderer. He was witnessing a lifetime of meticulous vengeance. "And now," she said, her gaze shifting to Thomas, "it is time for the final lesson." Before Daniels could react, the lights dimmed, and a soft click echoed through the room. He turned, only to see that the front and back doors had silently closed, locked from the inside. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier, as Mrs. Whitmore moved closer. "Detective," she said gently, "you've been diligent, yes. Careful, yes. Observant, yes. But you still do not see the full picture." Thomas watched in stunned silence as she led Daniels to a wall, pointing to a photograph. "Look closely," she instructed. "Do you see this man?" Daniels recognized the figure immediately. A lawyer, a powerful man who had allowed the drunk driver responsible for her parents' deaths to walk free. The same man who had evaded justice for decades. "He walked free," she whispered, almost tenderly. "And the world called it law. But law is not justice. And I am the balance." Daniel's pulse raced. What are you saying?" Mrs. Whitmore smiled, an expression both warm and terrifying. "I am saying that justice can be taught, detective. And tonight, you will understand it as I do." Thomas realized then that the final act was not merely an act of vengeance. It was a demonstration, a lesson for those who failed to see the truth, and the lesson was about to unfold. She moved with the precision of decades of planning, producing an envelope from her pocket and handing it to Daniels. "Inside," she said softly, "are the details of every act, every victim, every moment that shaped my path. Read them carefully, understand them, but remember, this is not about punishment. It is about revelation." Daniels hesitated, then opened the envelope. His eyes widened as he read, comprehending the full scope of her actions for the first time. He realized the depth of her intelligence, the meticulous planning, the moral reasoning, twisted, perhaps, but undeniably coherent. Thomas felt a strange sense of pride mixed with fear. His grandmother had not only orchestrated a lifetime of vengeance, but she had also ensured that the knowledge, the philosophy behind it, would be preserved, understood, and remembered. Then came the moment of shock. From another room, a soft click sounded, followed by the hum of a hidden mechanism. Daniels looked up, alarmed, as the walls of the kitchen shifted slightly, revealing a hidden passage, a secret room filled with artifacts, evidence, and documents detailing every single action Mrs. Whitmore had taken over the decades. "This," she said, gesturing to the room, "is the truth the world refused to acknowledge. And now, it is yours to witness." Daniels took a step back, realizing that the monster he had been hunting was not a chaotic killer, but a methodical, deeply wounded woman who had turned personal tragedy into a crusade for her own sense of justice. And in that moment, he understood the chilling paradox. She was both innocent and guilty, nurturer and executioner, grandmother and avenger. Thomas stepped forward, finally speaking. "Grandma, why?" She knelt, lifting him to her level. "Because, darling, sometimes the world must learn through its own mistakes. Sometimes the innocent must teach the guilty. And sometimes justice must be shown in its purest form." Daniels swallowed hard, a mixture of awe and fear surging through him. He had come seeking a criminal, but what he found was a story of grief, rage, intelligence, and the twisted beauty of moral balance. The night ended quietly. Thomas held his grandmother's hand, understanding, in his own way, the path she had chosen. Daniels left with the envelope and the knowledge, forever changed by what he had witnessed. And Mrs. Whitmore returned to her kitchen, humming softly, as if nothing had happened, the storm outside replaced by the calm of a world that had yet to understand the true measure of her justice. But as dawn approached, Thomas noticed something that made him pause. A photograph, slightly different from the others, pinned above the kitchen counter. It was a picture of a man who had never been wronged by her, someone unrelated to her crusade. And beneath it, in her familiar handwriting, was a single word: next. The realization struck him. The story was not over. The lesson had only just begun. And for a fleeting moment, Thomas understood that his grandmother, the woman who had nurtured him, protected him, and taught him, was far more than a survivor of tragedy. She was a force of nature, a balance of pain and precision, and the world would never see her coming.